Many Things Under a Rock, The Mysteries of Octopuses. That's the title of a new book, and that's our Techstination. I'm Fred Fishkin. Joining us from Alaska is author Dr. David Scheel. Hi, David.
Hello, how are you today?
Terrific. Great to meet you. You're a professor of marine biology at Alaska Pacific University and have been studying octopuses for more than 25 years. Why the octopus?
Well, why not? They're exciting animals. I'm primarily an animal behaviorist, and they have fascinating behavior. And then I live up in Alaska, and it turns out they're sometimes an important animal up here in the state of Alaska, and so it's been a good fit.
Well, they're not that easy to study. At least I don't think so, given their elusive nature. Tell me about it.
Yeah, they can be a little bit challenging. They're hard to find because they are excellent at camouflage, and they are somewhat finicky to capture and somewhat finicky to observe. So they can be a challenge, but that's part of the fun.
We'll get into some of that in a bit. Now, you've also lived with and studied African lions, I understand, in the Serengeti before
That's true,
deciding
yes.
before deciding to focus on marine research. Kind of opposite ends here, it sounds like. So you've experienced quite a climate change.
A little bit of a shift, yes.
And on that subject, what are the effects that we're seeing from climate change on the marine life and the octopuses that you spend so much time researching?
Well, the octopuses, probably globally, there's a lot of different species. So probably globally, the octopuses are doing okay. Some species will be helped by climate change, possibly, or their ranges will expand more northward. There's some good reason to suspect that might happen in the waters around the UK, for example. But other species may be harmed as the waters warm up or the water becomes more acidic. Then we may see that animals that are already at the limits of their ranges may contract. So up here in Alaska, for example, I think we're seeing that we have fewer octopuses in the shallow water habitats following warm years than we do following cold years.
Interesting. And when it comes to the issue of over-harvesting, how big of a problem is it?
That's a little harder to get at. Octopuses are harvested in so many different ways. They are relatively easy to over-harvest if the harvest pressure is fairly continuous. There was some interesting work done in Madagascar with the day octopus there, where they had a situation in which there was fairly continuous pressure on the octopuses, fairly continuous fishing, and it seemed like maybe they were taking too many. And so the communities there got together and set up a little bit of a rotating temporary closures. And by doing that, they were able to allow the octopuses to grow and expand during the period when their habitat was temporarily closed, and then harvest at a nice rate afterwards, and sort of keep the livelihood going. So it really depends on the details of the management.
So now the fun part, David, tell us more about what they are like, their intelligence, the social lives, the way they live, things that many of us find pretty amazing.
Oh, well, geez, narrow it down a little bit there for me. I wrote a whole book about that question.
How intelligent are they? I mean,
well,
we've seen jars being opened and things like that, and there are even more challenging things that they can accomplish, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot has been written about octopus intelligence, and they definitely show this in their behavior. They have recall and learning. They can recognize faces. They have a large brain for their body size, and in addition, they have a lot of sort of nerve clusters, and control is distributed throughout their arms. It's not all in their heads. So we're still kind of learning what they can do. Octopuses are notably curious animals. They're persistent. They're flexible. They investigate almost everything. And if one behavior doesn't work, they'll try something else. And curiosity, persistence, and flexibility are pretty much major parts of any intelligence, I think, including ours.
What about the social aspect of the way they live? Tell us about it and communicate.
Well, generally speaking, most octopuses are going to be found in solitary circumstances. And so we developed this notion that they were sort of a constitutionally solitary animal that really didn't want to have anything to do with each other. And that may be true, but there are times in the ocean when things that are very important to octopuses are very clustered in space. So you can have areas where there's very high amounts of food and very low amounts of shelter from predators. And octopuses need the food and they need the shelter. So when you get a little bit of shelter in a habitat like that, then you can get these clusters of octopuses all hanging out in the same area, and they kind of have to cope with one another. They may not be excited about it, but they sort of have to cope with one another. And so this sociability that we're talking about, it's not the same as you might see with cooperative, companionable pride of lions, for example. But once they're kind of forced to be together like that by circumstances, then they may end up jockeying for space and contesting over mates, and sort of they end up needing to convey their intentions. And that leads to them sort of signaling to each other. And all of a sudden you've got communication and social coping.
What are the means with which they do that? How do they communicate?
They use body patterns. So because of their camouflage abilities, they have this sort of incredible ability to change the darkness of their body and the pattern that's displayed on their body. And they can also change their posture. And so we see them, for example, on a site that I work on, octopuses that are going to stand their ground and sort of challenge an intruder or something like that. They'll stand tall, they'll turn dark, spread their arms and web, maybe also raise their mantles above their head, and it makes them look very large and threatening. And conversely, another octopus in an interaction that is not going to stand its ground, it maybe is going to give way, maybe it just kind of wants to get by, go past. It's going to adopt a very low posture, very flat to the ground, spread out, a body color that's a mixture of dark and light areas. And so it's a very distinctly different way of moving across the seafloor. And these things are then responded to by, the octopuses respond to each other in this way.
Is there a reason for people to be afraid of them, especially if you're diving?
Well, you have to be smart about interacting with them, I would say. First of all, they're very fragile animals. And so interacting with them in any way that's sort of physical is potentially bad for the octopus. But then in addition, some species can be dangerous. There are some very small octopuses that can have poisons that can kill a person relatively quickly. And then there are some very large octopuses that if you got yourself into the wrong situation, at least potentially could hold a person underwater, which is fine for a while until it isn't.
Tell us about the documentary you did a few years ago with PBS, Octopus Making Contact.
Yeah, it was interesting. So, to make that documentary, I had to have a very large aquarium in my house, and that was great. But it also it was a lot of effort. But then as a bonus to that, I got to spend time with an octopus sort of throughout the day. If I got up in the middle of the night, I could peek into the tank in the gloom and see what she was up to. I used to get up in the morning and sit by the fire and have my morning tea. and the lights would come on in the tank, and Heidi would wake up and sort of, it was interesting. I'd never known that octopuses do this, but they do morning stretches. So she'd come up and sort of do her morning yoga, her arms out, and sort of arch her arms in her web and just sort of wake up. And then after her morning stretches, she'd sort of sit in her den and just watch the world for a little while as dawn broke across the living room, so to speak.
Very, very interesting. So, I mean, when it comes to the documentary, the idea is to open up eyes around the world.
Yeah. My goal for that documentary was to sort of convey, and this is much of the same goal for the book, really, was to convey some of the excitement of watching animals and watching octopuses and interacting with them, and also some of the ways in which scientists try to understand the animals that they're working with, the ways in which animal behaviorists use behavior to understand more about the octopus. And in the film, the story that I wanted to tell was filtered through what the filmmakers could capture on camera and the way they wanted to organize the script and so on and so forth. And in the book, I was less constrained by the visual material and able to sort of create the scenes that I had encountered in my career.
Your daughter, Laurel, helped to work on this book as an artist, and her illustrations, we're going to show some of these throughout the video. Really wonderful. Tell us about it.
Yeah, thank you. Laurel was just, she's a talented kid. I have two wonderful daughters. They're both wonderfully talented. And Laurel's very interested in art. And even when she was the daughter who was most featured in the documentary some years back. And even then they were tempted to include some of her octopus drawings, but it didn't make the editorial cut in the end. And so I needed an artist to put some illustrations in this book. And one of the challenges I have working with artists is I want them to draw octopuses the way octopuses appear in the natural world. But most people have only seen octopuses in an aquarium, and maybe not that much. Whereas Laurel and Juniper, my two daughters, they've grown up with octopuses. They've been around octopuses pretty much since before they could walk. And so to Laurel, the shapes and lines and poses and dynamics of an octopus, I didn't have to coach her very much. She knew that part. And it was just capturing the scenes or the moods or the moments. Whereas with many artists that I've worked with, there's a sort of a period of trying to understand just how the octopus body operates. Because most artists, they can be wonderful artists, but they may not have spent that much time watching octopuses. And Laurel had that deep background with the animal that really allowed her to convey some fantastic scenes and poses and dynamics that can be conveyed by the octopus body.
How long do they live, David?
Most of them are very short-lived. You see species that live, maybe barely a year, up to some of the longer-lived, larger octopuses can live 3 to 5 years probably in the wild. Except in very cold water habitats. There is one observation of a deep sea species of octopus in water that is probably 2 degrees centigrade, just a sketch above freezing. And she was observed tending her eggs over a 4-year period, just tending eggs. And that's even more notable because during the period that octopuses tend eggs, they do not eat. And so from this, researchers were able to calculate that her lifespan probably exceeded 10 years, I think. And so that's the longest that an octopus probably lives.
Do you have any thoughts or ideas about why their lifespans are so relatively short?
Yeah. In ecology, we generally look to the odds of surviving to the next year for understanding how animals have been shaped in terms of their reproductive strategy. So if you're if your odds of living to the next year as an adult are very, very high, then it doesn't make a lot of sense to invest everything you've got in one offspring or, one batch of offspring, because it might be a bad year and things might not go well and you're going to be around next year to try again. And so for animals who have good odds of survival as they go from year to year, such as seabirds, for example, they often have small clutches and they nest over and over and over again over many years. But think about the other kinds of animals. Animals who have very low odds of making it into the next year. Animals who live in a very risky world. Their best odds is to put everything they've got into the reproductive bout right now. Once they reach a point where they can reproduce, put everything they've got into it, and then don't even worry about making it to the next year, because that way you maximize the odds of having success. And so salmon do that, for example. They're not going to make it back out into the ocean. They've had to go through too many life changes to go from saltwater to freshwater. And so they're called terminal spawners. They reproduce and die. And that's what octopuses do, because the odds of making it from year to year aren't that great.
Might be a terrible question. With all that you know about them, would you order octopus from a menu?
No, I generally don't eat octopuses. I don't like to kill them because they're way more interesting to me alive than as a meal. On some occasions, someone offers me a prepared octopus to eat, and then it becomes something that's a little hard to turn down. You don't want to be rude, and also you don't want to miss the experience, and you can't change the outcome at that point anyway. But it's been a long time since I tasted an octopus. I don't eat them.
Terrific. For more info, David, the best place, alaskaoctopus.com?
Yes, that's my webpage. Thank you. Yes.
Just terrific. And congratulations once again on the book, Many Things Under a Rock, The Mysteries of Octopuses. David Scheel, thanks for spending time with us.
Thanks for having me. It's been a privilege. Thank you.